Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Professor Aditi Bhutoria from the Public Policy and Management Group at the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. I'm an education economist and obviously also hold positions as strategic advisor with the EdTech Hub and research affiliate with the Ministry of Education in Saudi Arabia. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome you to this expert presentations and panel discussion session of IIM Calcutta's Decision Journal's flagship webinar. And today we would be talking about all things EdTech with this esteemed group of panelists. So without much ado, let me start introducing each one of them to you, post which we would have some presentations about their experiences on field policy and practice, as well as research, and then a panel discussion to think about future recommendations and directions for policy and research here. So firstly, Dr. Rajneesh Kumar, who is a mechanical engineer and has been with the Indian Railways since 1999. He holds a PhD in mechanical engineering, industrial management from IIT Varanasi, and currently he's in deputation to Ministry of Education as the Director of Digital Education. So one of the toughest jobs in the country right now, I would say, with the pandemic and digitization of education. A big welcome to you, Dr. Rajneesh, and we look forward to hearing your views today.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Aditi.
Thank you. Okay, following this, we have Professor Tom Creek. Professor Creek is a professor of digital education and policy and deputy pro-vice chancellor at Swansea University, UK. Whilst his disciplinary background is actually computer science, he's been heavily involved with education and digital policy in the Wales, UK, and has been in this for more than 10 years now, thinking about curriculum and qualification reforms. Professor Creek has chaired the Welsh government's review of ICT curricula in 2013 and chaired the development of the National Digital Competency Framework in 2016. Alongside his academic roles, he's also been a commissioner of the National Infrastructure Commission of Wales from 2018 to present, and editor-in-chief of the Computer Journal. So, of course, doing a lot in this space, Professor Creek, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, following this, we have Dr. Villima Wadhwa. Dr. Villima is the director of the ASAR Center, the Annual Status of Education Report in India. She has been associated with the center since its very inception in 2005 and has been a key architect of the ASAR survey, which we all probably know about in the education space today in India. Dr. Wadhwa earned her master's and PhD in economics from the University of California and has been teaching statistics and econometrics at the University of California, Irvine, and the Indian Statistical Institute, New Delhi. She has been a member of various government international committees, including the Questionnaire Expert Group for PISA. Dr. Wadhwa, I'm sure we would get to know lots of interesting insights from you on the economics of education and the state of digital education and online education in India. Welcome to the team.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditi.
And last but definitely not the least, Dr. Bjorn Hassler. I've been a personal enthusiast of his work. Bjorn is the technical director of the EdTech Hub. In fact, he's been rooted to the EdTech Hub since its inception, one of the key players to really make it work. In his work, Bjorn specializes in digital technology for education and research, globally so, but for the most disadvantaged groups, I would say, and has a systems approach and work-based learning approach to his research and practice. He's an advocate for international cooperation and development, and his interests include sustainable and scalable approaches for program implementation to improve educational outcomes, whether it's primary, secondary, or tertiary education. Bjorn, absolute pleasure to have you represent the EdTech Hub here, and hope to learn a lot more about the organization as well as your own work. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aditi. It's a real pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come and present to you all. Okay for me to go ahead with the presentation?
That'd be great. I think starting with Bjorn's presentation for the audience, we are planning to first put forth the views of our experts on educational challenges which are faced in a pandemic-ridden world, and the role of technology in this space. The experiences are really broad across the world, whether it's India, UK, or Sub-Saharan Africa and other places. So once we get a holistic view from these presentations, we would then enter the panel as discussed earlier. Bjorn, over to you.
Thank you so much. As I said, it's a real pleasure to be here. I've taken the liberty to put down some really broad brush strokes on the theme for today, policy and practice for education continuity. I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the EdTech Hub in case you don't know what it is. We're a global nonprofit research partnership, and our goal is to empower people by giving them the evidence they need to make decisions about technology in education. So it's really about bringing evidence to how we can use EdTech, how we can use technology in education. You know, I think we all agree that technology has the potential to contribute at least to solving the global learning crisis. But we might also say that it's only been partially realized, this promise. And even more so, we can say there are opportunities for technology to contribute to the COVID-induced exacerbation of the global learning crisis. But again, we might ask, to what extent is that potential being realized, and for who? The hub has these 5 topic areas. It's important that we have a focus in our work. And I'll make that point throughout, that this focus is really, really important. So we focus on TPD, technology to support personalized learning, teaching at the right level, participation in school, technology to strengthen data and education management, and of course, girls' education. We have 6 focus countries. We do some work globally. We have a help desk that operates globally and so forth, but we are primarily focusing on these 6 countries, 2 countries in West Africa, 2 countries in East Africa, and then 2 countries in South Asia. And these are some of the approaches that we said. We commission large-scale studies. We undertake studies ourselves. We undertake desk-based work, of course. We have this help desk. We undertake commissions and so forth, sandboxes, provide technical assistance. So we're hoping that a blended approach is not just about doing research, but it's about a blended approach that includes small-scale experimentation, that includes support to stakeholders through a help desk, through technical assistance, but also very large-scale, very rigorous research. So again, it's about empowering people, empowering stakeholders, all kinds of stakeholders, by providing evidence so that they can make decisions about education, about children's learning, and what role technology plays in that. All right, so that was my quick pitch for the EdTech Hub. Let me get onto the meat of the conversation, or the vegetables of the conversation. I'm vegetarian myself, I should say, perhaps. So let me talk about 5 constraints. When I think about education, when we think about education in the EdTech Hub, this is what we're interested in. So firstly, we want to work with the poorest. We want to do something for the poorest. Let's say the poorest 30%, the poorest 50%. Constraint number 2, we don't just want to do technology in education to do a random thing, but we want it to promote learning, right? So we want to increase learning gains, technology in education for the purpose of increasing learning gains. Constraint number 2 in the use of EdTech is it has to be affordable, right? Now, affordable in an absolute sense. So we know that, typically the available finance in an education system in a very low income country. And I'm not speaking for India here, of course, because India is vast and India has an amazing tech sector and amazing things. So there's it's very specific to say, okay, what does work for the poorest population? So when we look at the poorest populations, say in Malawi, the available finance, the finance that isn't already tied up in terms of paying teachers and so forth, is about $5 per child per year. So that's what we mean by affordable, right? as a corollary of this, it's actually what are the learning gains per unit cost? What learning gains do we get for that $5? So it's not just about spending that $5, but it's about the resulting learning gains. If you like learning adjusted years of schooling, then it's the lay, not just the lays, but it's the lays per unit cost. Constraint number 4, we want this to have an impact right now. Right now probably means within a time scale of 5 years rather than 5 to 10 or 10 to 20. Constraint number 5. When we look at, the results of, the various amazing tests that we have through ASA, ICANN, UASO, and so forth, we see that a 10% learning gain is not sufficient. The child that after 6 to 8 years has only learned or hasn't even learned grade 2, how does 10% help them? So they achieve grade 2 and a little bit of grade 3, but we want them to achieve the end of primary school, grade 6, grade 8. So we need impact that is not just 10%, but we need impact that is at least twofold, ideally tenfold impact, right? So when we look at all of this, what are the options that we have, given that these are my constraints that I've put down, the constraints that we want to operate under? What are the options that we have? So let's look at some areas where we might use technology in education, right? So we can look at students, technology use for students, technology use for teachers, technology use at the national system of education level, and I'm going to introduce another area later on. And so the use of technology at all of these areas has to be focused, though, on learning gains for students. So when we use technology at the teacher level or at the national system level, it has to still result in learning outcomes for students. It might also result in learning outcomes for teachers, but these have to contribute to learning outcomes for students, not just in learning outcomes for teachers. Let's look at some of the areas that are currently being discussed and look at them through the light of these 5 constraints that I've introduced. A lot of effort is spent on personalized digital learning. Right? Does it really reach the poorest 30%? Where we say, yes, children have mobile phones. I know many children, they have mobile phones. Many children have mobile phones. That's true. Even in poor countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there's always children, 30%, maybe even 50%, that have access to technology, but those aren't the 50% that we're interested in here. We're interested in the poorest 30%, and the poorest 30% in sub-Saharan Africa actually don't have access to technology. They don't. So for that $5 a year, can you provide technology to that child and connectivity? It's like, you show me the device that you can buy for $5. We're all talking about cheaper tablets and all of that, but it's not as cheap as $5, even if, it just doesn't work, right? So I think this doesn't reach the poorest 30%. It does promote learning gains, right? We do know that, like the learning gains through personalized digital learning are secure, but the learning gains per unit cost aren't particularly favorable because personalized digital learning is expensive and the learning gains are more of the order of 10%. They're definitely not tenfold. We're looking at, a 0.2 or something like that, so it's a great solution. I think it's great for maxing out where many other things have been done already, but it's not going to help the poorest, right? So let me look at the next thing, which is textbooks. It's a bit retro, and it's a bit retro for an EdTech presentation, but actually there are things that we could do with textbooks that can reach the poorest. And actually textbooks are artificially expensive in many settings. And when we write the paper about this session, we will argue some of this in more detail. But I think that we could have an impact of 4 times. I think we could lower the cost of textbooks probably by a factor of 4. And in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, there's about 4 children sharing a textbook. So it's not that there's no textbooks, but 4 children are sharing a textbook. So we could have a situation within 5 years where every child has a printed textbook, and where digital versions are also available for those that can access them, but where the poorest 30% all have a printed textbook. Now, that won't improve learning gains on its own, but it will contribute towards learning gains. Okay, so I need to accelerate a little bit. Students with special needs, I think that is one of the exceptions where you really would want to use technology at the student level. I will argue that out later on. Teachers, e-learning and MOOCs, one of the kind of common approaches during the pandemic. It does reach the poorest 30% because the teachers often have devices. But I would argue, and we will argue in the paper, that actually there's very little evidence that any of this has actually led to outcomes. Like e-learning, supporting teachers through WhatsApp, yes, I think that could work, that does work. There's encouraging things there. But MOOCs in sub-Saharan Africa for the poorest teachers, there's been a counter movement to that for many years, saying don't import these things, yeah. So I think we're really looking at a really kind of quite poor outcome here. On the other hand, school-based, peer-facilitated, scaffolded TPD, which is a specific approach that we have, it can reach all of those things. I'm not sure it would have an impact of 10 times, but similarly to the textbooks, there's a huge untapped potential for doing TPD properly in sub-Saharan Africa. We know from many of the World Bank reports that we've seen that really the way teacher professional development, both pre-service and in-service, is done in sub-Saharan Africa has huge gaps. It doesn't conform with what we know through the evidence. So there's huge potential, not 10 times, I would say, but perhaps another 4 times or so impact. Better teacher allocation. This is a really interesting area where I just referred to a study in Guatemala where I think 700 schools or so were built. But it turned out actually that you could have done with a 20th of that. You could have built 350 schools instead, and you would have had the same catchment areas. And so there are ways of looking at doing teacher allocation through geospatial methods that can see massive impact, where you could actually get teachers to where they're needed. You need to look at teacher preferences, you need to create incentives, but this is actually just redistributing the existing workforce. It doesn't actually cost you very much. It's really cheap at the systems level, because these geospatial methods, they're complex, but they require a researcher or a couple of researchers to really think about it for a few weeks, and then you have it. The data you need, you can often gather from satellite images. Much of the school data already exists, so there's huge opportunities here. I want to take the last few minutes to speak about national education systems. And we often say that, well, these education systems, they're not very efficient, are they? And they must be made more efficient. And I actually think sometimes that is a bit of a neo-colonial view, if I may say so. Because what does it really mean to radically increase the efficiency of national education systems? Like for the poorest countries, the national education system is propped up through donor programming. The poorest countries, in a sense, you might argue, aren't even financially fully in charge. I say this with some hesitancy, but often these education systems, when you really look at it, they're not really financially in charge because so much of the finance comes from donors, right? So when we say, oh yes, you in the national education systems, you must be more efficient with the resources, it's actually about the donor efficiency. And I think there's huge potential for increasing the efficiency of aid, which means increasing the efficiency of donor programs, the kind of programs that I run, the kind of programs that I've been involved in, and I know this is definitely not the case for India, but for many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the poorest countries, that is really the case. So how do we do that? Firstly, we need to collaborate beyond national boundaries. One of the real issues with COVID funding was that it was per country. We did not think about, so donor aid during COVID, we did not think about the synergies that we could have by creating resources, for instance, that would work for more than one country. How much of the resource that was put into COVID, in mitigating COVID, has resulted in open resources? I recall that USAID was trying to locate all of the radio programming that they had funded during the Ebola crisis to be able to reuse it during COVID. Very, very few resources were surfaced. There's a huge, huge sinkhole that is taking up these resources where we could really, really improve efficiency. So my view in conclusion, I've gone slightly over, sorry for that, we can achieve significant improvements by 2030 that meet all of these criteria. If we're willing. It means departing from some of the business as usual. It means exploring radically new directions, perhaps not so radical, but certainly in terms of collaboration, radically new directions. But I do think we could be seeing these kinds of gains if we really put our minds to it. So finally, thank you for the invitation to speak. I have to put up a picture in lieu for not being there, which is a real shame. This is the auditorium. All of you on the web stream will know it. You say, of course, it's the auditorium. Everybody uses this image all of the time. Show something more interesting. Show the student cafeteria or something like that. But it's the iconic image, I think, that is available online. So I'm putting this to, and I hope that I will be able to see some of the other places of campus in the near future. So thank you so much again for the invitation to speak, and thank you so much for your time. Here's some of the contact details. Back to you, Aditi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bjorn. That was a very interesting presentation and thought-provoking as well. And obviously the cherry on the cake was the picture from IMC. We hope to get you here soon. Yeah, without much ado, now let me bring in Professor Tom Creek to talk about some of his experiences in the EdTech space in UK.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and certainly to lead on after Bjorn's presentation. That's really useful kind of context and themes I'm sure we're all going to pick up, and certainly in the Q&A. So let me just share my screen so you can see everything. How's that? Is that okay? Are we good to go? Yeah, fantastic. So thank you very much. Partly just to give a bit of context around what's been happening, the massive impact on COVID, certainly on UK, on the university sector in tertiary education in the UK. But I think as we go through this session, I can certainly reflect on some of the things that's happened across the entire educational kind of landscape, across all settings and contexts in the UK, particularly the massive impact it's had on compulsory education in Wales and in the UK, particularly because we're going through some major curriculum and qualifications reform. So actually this has probably come, when's the worst time to publish a brand new national curriculum? In January 2020, before a global pandemic hits. And then again, I think this is really reflects on the very nature of kind of digital competence, digital pedagogy and practice. But I think in particular, I'm going to pull out some themes of some of the major empirical work we've done, certainly from March 2020 onwards, and some of the key themes, just I suppose reflections on kind of where we are now, particularly as we slowly start to emerge from the kind of spectre of COVID, and as I've framed it with this title of this new abnormal, and also the reflections on what may happen in the near future in tertiary education in the UK, and hopefully that will seed some discussion for the Q&A. Thank you. There's obviously been massive, the impact this has had on society, on culture, on the economy is profound and ongoing, and unevenly distributed, as kind of Bjorn alluded to. I'm sure we'll pick up themes around kind of inequity and inequality, big themes that have been exposed around digital and data poverty, what this has looked like for young people across the whole of the UK being able to meaningfully access and engage with education. This is an ongoing problem, and it's certainly not solved. It's not just a matter of giving people kit, giving people laptops or devices and giving them connectivity. So actually just giving them a device and a dongle doesn't solve the problem, the intrinsic underlying kind of educational inequity piece. And I think there's been a multitude of research, and some of myself and my colleagues have been publishing a fair bit of stuff in this space over the past kind of 18-20 months. And I think this has really reinforced the emerging context of sort of it's across the Rubicon. This is the profound shift and change of what this means for education in a fairly fundamental way, and that sort of readjustment or reflections on the impact of, or the potential impact of digital technologies on education, particularly when you can reflect on the last kind of 5-10 years, when reports of evidence that literally billions of pounds have been spent on educational technology interventions in the UK in a variety of settings and contexts. And actually the majority of them have been of questionable efficacy and impact. And actually the evaluations have been poor in many ways, but actually the focus has sometimes been on the technology itself or the kit, and actually not really on the cultures, the behaviors, the dispositions, the effective change of pedagogy and practice, professional learning, professional development for practitioners, and actually intrinsically thinking about redesigning learning. And I think that's where perhaps the theme I'll kind of pick up as we go through and towards the end around this kind of shift and change in professional practice and what that looks like about fundamentally rethinking and redesigning learning. So I'll give a very kind of brief spread through some of the work that I've done with colleagues over the past 20 months. Some of it's been grounded in the UK, so I've been working with colleagues from Bristol and Swansea, and actually we've also done some broader international work which has been conducted with colleagues from South Africa, Australia, India and Hong Kong, and just to kind of try and better understand the impact on the learning, teaching and assessment aspects in higher education, looking at the health and well-being of practitioners, and getting the perspectives of different groups and types of staff and faculty and professional services staff within an educational context in universities. So I'll focus first on some of the UK academic staff, and this was some of the data that we kind of launched in the immediate aftermath, this shift to emergency remote teaching, and actually just trying to get a better understanding of intrinsic identity and confidence and capability to be able to adjust to this rapid shift to emergency remote teaching or kind of online learning, teaching and assessment. And actually the reflections of practitioners, particularly in that early phases of the pandemic, there was fear and uncertainty. There was massive disruption. Obviously, that people were still essentially having to do their jobs with this kind of profound impact on lives and society and health and well-being. But interestingly, the ability of institutions to rapidly adjust to these kind of to having the infrastructure, to having the staff who could support this, to being able to support both faculty and students, and also just in the sense of that mindset around what does digital learning entail, rather than it just being around, yes, we've got our VLE, we've got our infrastructure, we were able to do Zoom and Teams and whatever other kind of technologies we've deployed at kind of enterprise scale. Actually, how does that meaningfully think about appropriate learning, teaching and assessment that would be disciplinary specific, that would be appropriate for different types of subjects and different types of degree programs, but also in the sense of practitioners who have a broad and varying levels of expertise and confidence and capability. And also, as many of us are right now, being able to do this at home. So actually suddenly you've got this transition to working at home. I've got 2 kids downstairs, so they might join us at some point to say hello, but just the sheer fact of this was the reality of doing emergency kind of remote teaching for practitioners. Again, that uneven distribution across the different subject areas and disciplines, and you could reflect on, say, STEM disciplines or computer scientists or people with a strong technology background perhaps felt more confident and capable of that shift to online and using these technologies and products and services. But actually, it's interesting whether that, as we went through some of the analysis, both the kind of quant and the sort of qualitative, more open text analysis, looking at did that translate into adjustments and adaptation for their pedagogy and practice? So, there's no problem with being sort of confident and capable of using the technologies, but actually, was there any sort of adjustment for, well, actually, I'm doing exactly the same lecture that I would have done in the classroom face to face? Have I adjusted any of my assessments? Well, no, because actually some of them you had to, because it would have been a 2-hour exam, but actually you might have just adjusted the mode and the model and making that a 24-hour examination. So genuinely that space to rethink that, and also being able to do that in the context of institutional rules and regulations, being able to shift and change perhaps learning outcomes at the module or the program level. Then actually if there was professional sort of regulatory sort of professional practice for certain programs and courses, those adjustments, were they possible within the context of becoming a pharmacist or becoming an accountant or becoming a professional scientist or engineer? So these were the sort of the rapid challenges being faced. Also, how this was unevenly distributed across the different academic grades or kind of career progression. So there were some very interesting results from tenured professors who were in some respects saying the pandemic's fantastic because I can just concentrate on my research, because they largely didn't do a lot of teaching. And that was very painful and unevenly distributed for early career academics, in the sense of the burden of teaching responsibilities, the massive impact this might have on their early career in the sense of for promotion, people on precarious contracts, so they were on kind of temporary contracts, or they were doing their postdoctoral research and perhaps looking for their first academic contract when they had finished their PhD. This was particularly painful and certainly felt kind of unevenly. And I think that sort of reflects some wider trends in the UK kind of higher education sector. But we've had this massive sort of marketization, sort of commercialization, or rather commoditization of UK HE, and actually what has that meant on student recruitment and retention, this wider UK market, what has this meant on the financial sustainability of institutions in general, and very obviously what is the UK's dependency on a very strong international student market. So attracting students from certain countries from across the world to come and study in the UK, this has been hugely important over the past kind of 10, 15, 20 years. I think that precarization piece, the idea about financial sustainability, kind of job cuts, has been really, really painful. And actually, some UK universities have just been through industrial action, have been on strike over the last couple of weeks. So that thing about work intensification, how is this the gender pay gap? How is this unevenly distributed between faculty, and the kind of acknowledgement of roles and responsibilities and work and pension and paying conditions? And actually that's an ongoing problem, which certainly has been exacerbated by COVID, but also just in the sense of how success is measured in academia. So if this has had a massive impact on your research because you've had to do loads more teaching, or because you've had to do lots more kind of academic and pastoral support, actually, what does that mean for your kind of longer term career? We talk in the context of there being a COVID generation for students as they go through their education. There might be kind of this kind of COVID impact on staff and colleagues as they kind of continue their academic career too. And there's this, I suppose, perhaps unfair, this limited identification, but there was uneven distribution with kind of digital affordances and digital practice. Kind of what does that look like? Similarly, I'll kind of briefly cut through this. So there was a big thing, the context of pandemia is really, really interesting around the pandemic in academia. This huge and ongoing impact on health and well-being, and actually this thing, digital fatigue, demotivation, the kind of stress, the concerns about using kind of digital technologies and actually kind of always being online and being available to students and having to do stuff in the context of what's going on in universities, worried about the future and that wider change, and actually genuinely impacting on health and well-being, and what does this mean for the now and going forwards. And again, I think we've seen people leaving academia, going into industry and into kind of moving into other sectors, because this has been really challenging over the past 20 months. But also fundamentally asking, do you want to work in academia? there's a genuine concern around kind of a sort of a pipeline of sort of the attractiveness of keeping people in academia, the attractiveness of doing a PhD and sort of going into academic practice. And I think this has really exacerbated some of the concerns, and some of this might be in a very specific kind of UK context, but again, it's that real challenge around the role, rethinking the kind of fundamental role of universities. It is to there's that wider piece around degree programs, producing graduates, undergrad and postgrad, research and innovation, sort of policy and practice type stuff, and this wider kind of civic mission piece. But actually, I think there is massive unrest in lots of institutions in the UK. Just to kind of touch upon, I think this is didn't actually do a lot of research about students, because I think there have been a lot of studies and surveys focusing on the impact on students and different types of students and different types of kind of student communities. We thought this was a forgotten sector, was thinking about professional services staff. So there was a lot of focus on academics and faculty. It's like, what about everyone else who ensures that the universities are able to do what they need to do? So we kind of did a very big kind of UK-wide surveys, had a massive response from colleagues across the UK, and just in the sense of better understanding how this is impacting on their ability to do their job, their role and functions, like how that's impacted on their kind of productivity, things like managerialism and sort of micro managerialism, the impact on their health and well-being, which has been clearly there's that kind of huge negative impact, and obviously assuming everyone has an appropriate work environment at home, and the carers, childcare responsibilities, all this kind of stuff about how you're able to fit in all the roles and responsibilities you have to do. But also interestingly, some of the work that we've been doing around kind of the assessment of senior leadership of UK institutions. We are going to replicate our original survey from 2020 in about a couple of weeks' time. So it'll be really interesting to see how the perceptions of university leadership have changed over that period, and in the context of adapting and adjusting to a global pandemic, but also what has that meant for supporting staff, supporting students, supporting the range of staff, and actually still fulfilling and enabling the core functions of a university kind of then, now, and perhaps going forwards. And again, these sort of fundamental sort of shifts around sort of campus-based university model about students in the UK, in the general case, move away from home to come to university, and that's a life kind of experiential piece. But I think there's a real tension around the language and the rhetoric about online learning and teaching. You've had UK government ministers essentially saying that online learning is not as good as face-to-face learning and teaching. They are getting a less good experience because they are, universities are being sneaky by not going back to face-to-face learning and teaching as soon as possible. And actually that feels like, and I'm sure we'll pick this up in the Q&A, is around a fundamental misunderstanding of the evidence base and actually the approach of hybrid blended learning, or just the efficacy and the benefits of doing stuff in an online setting, but the idea that actually you have to be face-to-face. So I suppose just to kind of sum up and perhaps pull together some threads, I think we know that we are not post-COVID in any sense, and I think that kind of the framing around a new abnormal is really interesting, because we know that I think there has been a fundamental change in the way that we think about education and educational delivery, but actually the what, how, and where of learning. So actually asking some quite fundamental questions of where does learning take place and how it actually takes place. And actually that's invariant to whether you're face-to-face in a classroom or whether you're doing stuff online. This kind of whole kind of combination of this kind of design of learning that's appropriate for the setting and context for the type of learners is really, really important. And also, clearly it's about the setting, the context, the disciplines, the domains, whatever, is actually having that adaptability and flexibility, and not thinking this kind of one top-down kind of canonical approach that's suitable for everything. I'm delighted that there is this renewed focus on kind of digital pedagogy and practice. All this prominence has been massively improved. I do think that means there are knock-on consequences for infrastructure, for professional learning, and actually what does this mean for everyone, especially in the context of living in a digital, data-driven and computational world and society. I think there is lots to be considered about kind of more criticality needed for this widespread application and use of educational technology. So we've rolled out these things at pace and at scale, national scale. We've made these investments. what happens to the data? Is it learner-centered? Is it for the benefit of learners? Is it for the benefit of institutions? Or is it for the benefit of a lot of US technology companies? So kind of what happens with this kind of stuff? And I think there's still some big questions around, I think there's, the benefit of educational technology, there's huge opportunities, but again, it's the framing and actually how they are doing. And then finally is this kind of wider sort of policy context around, we are thinking about this in the context of this, a post-COVID economic recovery, this bigger focus on digital. We're talking about, the context of digital economy, perhaps in double quotes, future skills demand, like the future of work, digital innovation. What does this look like? And again, it's like, how do we prepare graduates or learners of the future to kind of to be flexible in this post-COVID digital world? So it's lots of threads to pick up, I'm sure. Thank you very much. Here's some you won't be able to read this, it's too small, but we'll share the slides afterwards, and here's links to some of our work. Thank you very much. Thanks. Apologies.
Thank you, Professor Creek. That was a lot of details also on not just your personal research, but how that really translates into policy, and some very important questions for us to pick up from. So I think it's a perfect time to call on Villima to share the Indian context now. So we heard some of the perspectives from the UK. Villima, would you like to just share your slides and start on, please?
I will. Can you see this?
Yes. Yeah, would be good to put it on presentation mode.
I'm doing that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Aditi. And hello, everyone. Thank you for the invite to present here today. This is actually a perfect segue from what Tom was presenting. He was talking about higher education in the UK, and I'll be talking more about primary education in India. As you know, the annual status of education report, what we refer to as ASER, has been providing estimates for learning and schooling every year from 2005 to 2014, and then every other year since then. And however, the cycle was broken in 2020 because of the pandemic, because we couldn't go into the field. But at some level, it was even more important to bring out an annual annual status of education report. And so what we did was we adapted ASER to a phone-based format in 2020 and 2021, and focusing in the surveys, since they were done on the phone, did not assess children, but they focused on availability of learning material and learning resources available to children during the period when schools were closed. We also found windows during the various waves of the pandemic where we could actually go to the field and conduct field surveys so that we could get an idea about learning levels during this time. And we've done 3 field surveys in the last 2 years. The first one was in the state of Karnataka, which was done just prior to the second wave in March of 2021. And this was in the school year 2020-2021. So in India, the school year goes from April through March of the following year. And then we did a survey in Chhattisgarh in October, November, and finally in West Bengal in December of 2021. And so these last 2 surveys were done in the current 2021-22 school year. And what I will be presenting today will be findings from all of these 5 surveys, focusing on the phone surveys in terms of changes in enrollment and access to learning levels. These are surveys which are representative at the state and national levels. And then I'll talk a little bit about the changes in learning levels from the 3 field surveys in these 3 states. So just a quick look at the design of ASER. Our field surveys are household surveys done in all rural districts of the state, or nationally when there is a national survey. And typically what we do is in each of the rural districts, we sample 30 villages from the census village list. And then in each of the 30 sampled villages, 20 households are randomly selected. And we collect information on all children in the age group of 3 to 16 in the surveyed households, and all children in the age group of 5 to 16 are tested on a basic foundational literacy and numeracy tool, which I'll show you in just a few minutes. And so these surveys are representative at the state and district, national, state and district levels. And the phone surveys, for the phone surveys, what we did was we used the ASER 2018 sample as the sampling frame. So since ASER 2018 was nationally representative, we had phone numbers for about 350,000 households, which we used as the frame to sample for our phone surveys. And these phone surveys were representative at the national and state levels. Just a quick look at the sample sizes of the 5 surveys that I will be presenting from. So like I said, the 2 phone surveys went to pretty much every rural district of the country. The 2021 had about 75,000 children and households that were surveyed. The 2020 was a slightly smaller sample size with about 50,000 children. And the field surveys were representative of the state. So as you know, there's been a lot of talk about the impact of the pandemic on education, in particular on the fact that we will see big learning losses. But there was also the fear, especially in low-income countries, that this would also lead to more children dropping out of school. So in what follows, I'll be presenting on shifts in enrollment, access to learning resources and learning materials during the period when schools were closed from the R2 phone surveys. And then I'll move on to looking at the changes and trying to estimate the learning loss that we are seeing from the 3 state surveys. Okay, so let's look at enrollment first. So if we look at the 6 to 14 age group, the enrollment rate has been in excess of 95% for many years now. In 2018, in the age group of 6 to 14, about 2.5% children were not enrolled. This number increased slightly to 4.6% in 2020. So we did see the proportion of not currently enrolled children going up, but then it stabilized in 2021. Even this increase that we saw was really concentrated in the younger age groups. So if we break up the 6 to 14 age group, we saw the increase in out of school numbers for the younger age groups. And remember, schools shut down in March of 2020. The 2020 phone survey was done in September of 2020. And it's quite possible that this increase that we were seeing in out of school numbers for these younger children could just have been younger children waiting to get admission in schools. The second big change that we see in terms of enrollment patterns is this jump in the proportion of children enrolled in government schools. Now, if you look at the proportion of children enrolled in private schools in rural India, that's been going up from about 16% in 2006, and it stabilized around 30% in 2018. And what we see then is this, for the first time after many years, an increase in government school enrollment in 2021 from about 65% to about 70%. Now, again, this could be happening because of a variety of reasons. With budgets getting squeezed, it's possible that parents have moved their children to government schools where they don't have to pay fees. We also know that many low-cost private schools shut down during the pandemic, so these children would then move to government schools. Also, during this period, government schools were giving free meals when they, for the short period that they were open, but they were also distributing the midday meal ration to children. And so that could be another reason for this shift. And finally, it could be because with migrants moving back to villages, then it's more likely that the children of migrants would be enrolled in government schools. So it's difficult to say. The situation is still fluid. Schools, India had one of the longest durations of school closures. Even when schools opened, they were for higher grades. The situation is still quite fluid. Finally, they've said that from April 1st, all schools will open. So we need to wait and see, whether these changes that we are seeing are, temporary or permanent. But we are seeing an increase in government school enrollment. Next, let's look at access to learning resources. As you know, during the pandemic, states distributed all kinds of learning materials, from traditional learning materials like textbooks and worksheets to programs broadcast on the television and radio to online resources as well as live online classes. However, to access these online resources, children have to have access to a device and, not just have the device at home, but the children should have access to it. Now, during this period, we've seen a huge increase in smartphone availability in rural India, which has almost doubled since 2018, from about, in 2018, about 36.5% enrolled children had a smartphone at home, and this increased to almost 68% in 2021. However, having a smartphone does not guarantee that the child has access to it. And indeed, what we found was that about 26% children said, of the children who had a smartphone at home, 26% of fourths said that they had no access at all to the smartphone. And about 50% said that they had access, but only sometimes. Understandably, older children had more access than younger children. What about learning materials distributed by the state? The state was extremely successful in distributing textbooks. And this was the point that Bjorn also made in his presentation. In 2021, 84% children enrolled in government schools said that they had the textbook of their current grade. And this number is from 2020. This was even higher, closer to 90% in 2021. So the state was extremely successful in getting the textbooks out to children. However, not so much in terms of other resources. So if we, in terms of other than textbooks, only about 35% children said that they had received some other learning material from their schools. And, in the absence of traditional learning resources, we also saw parents compensating in terms of other supplementary aids. And what we saw was a big increase in tuition. So, tuition has been steady at about 30% for both government and private school children. About 30% children take an extra paid tuition. And this number is now up to almost 40% in 2021. Now let's move on to looking at what we found in terms of changes in learning levels. And we are talking about foundational learning levels, and I'll be presenting from the 3 states that we were able to visit and do a field survey during the last 2 years. So here's the ASER reading tool. This is a tool in Hindi. The ASER it is administered one-on-one with each child, and it is administered in about 21 languages across the country. As you can see, it's a basic foundational reading tool. The highest level in the tool is what we call the story level, which is pegged at about, at text that you typically see in grade 2 level textbooks. Below that is a shorter reading text pegged at about grade 1 level text, and below that is, whether the child could, if the child cannot even read this, whether the child can read simple 2-syllable words. If not that, then just simple letters. And a child who cannot even read letters is what we call a beginner level child. So like I said, this tool is administered to all children in the age group of 5 to 16, one-on-one. And so it's basically a foundational basic literacy tool. So let's look at the changes in reading. Across all 3 states, we see big drops in learning levels. So if you look at, for instance, Chhattisgarh, grade 3. So in 2014, 21% children in grade 3 would be at, say, at grade level. So they could read that grade 2 level text. This increased to about 30% in the next 2 years and has dropped drastically to 12%. You see the same happening in Karnataka and West Bengal. So learning levels that were kind of steady or slightly increasing in the last few years seem to have plunged during this period, which we expected, but these are very sharp drops. You have a similar situation for standard 5 kids. So this table gives us the proportion of standard 5 kids who could read that grade 2 level text. And again, you're seeing across all 3 states that learning levels that were either steady or slightly increasing have dropped drastically in this last year across the board, where you are in a situation that learning levels in 2021 are below what they were in 2014. The situation in arithmetic is not very different. And here's the arithmetic tool. So again, the arithmetic tool has 5 levels. The highest level is simple division, 3-digit by 1-digit, and it has a remainder, typically seen in grade 3 or 4 textbooks. Below that is a 2-digit subtraction with borrowing. Then we have double-digit number recognition and single-digit number recognition. This tool is also administered one-on-one with all children in the age group of 5 to 16. And here again, we see big drops. So this is standard grade 3 percentage of children who could do at least that subtraction problem. Again, if you look at Karnataka, 26% children in grade 3 in 2014 could do the subtraction problem. And this number is now down to 17%. And you see this in all 3 states. Same thing happening for standard 5, you see, and so this is the percentage of children who could do division in grade 5, and note that in each of the states we see a big drop. Again, like reading, the learning levels in 2021 have fallen below what they were in 2014.
William, I'll just ask you to gradually wrap up. Thank you.
Yes, I have a few slides only. Now, ASER doesn't track children, but because we have data over many years, we can do an artificial cohort analysis. And so here's a look at the situation in Karnataka. This is for Karnataka. And what we've done here is we've got grades 2, 3, 4, and 5 across different years. And so if you look at the cohort, which started grade 2 in 2014 in Karnataka, so these are the blue, this is the blue diagonal, about 6% could read at grade 2 level. And 2 years later, when they were in grade 4, about 30% of this cohort could read at grade 2 level. So an improvement of about 24 percentage points, about 12 percentage point improvement every year. Okay, the same thing you can see for the cohort that started grade 2 in 2016, went from 7% to about 33%, again about 12 to 13 percentage point improvement every year. Now look at the cohort that started grade 2 in 2018. They were in grade 4 in 2020, and this number increased from 8% to 18%. So the improvement that you're seeing a 10 percentage point improvement over 2 years as compared to a 12 percentage point improvement that we've been seeing in the past over 1 year. So, we are talking about a learning loss of more than 1 year for this cohort of children, and we see a similar pattern for Chhattisgarh. So just to wind up, what we see is significant increases in the proportion of children enrolled in government schools. But while the situation is fluid, states still need to be prepared to absorb this increase when the schools open up very soon. Big increase in availability of smartphones, but you need to take into account that having a smartphone at home does not necessarily guarantee access to the child. And so what we need to figure out what works and how and for whom, to figure out how to carry on with this, improve digital content and delivery in the future. And finally, for several years in the pre-COVID period, foundational learning levels, which had been improving, we are now seeing a serious learning loss. And so when children come back to school, before we start with business as usual and start with the grade level curriculum, it's important to provide the support to them so that they acquire the basic key skills to get them back on track. Now, all these reports are available on our website, so please do have a look for the details. I'm going to stop here and stop my
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Wilima. In fact, we had a keynote speech today morning by Dr. Petrinos, who also said that this about 1 year of learning losses is literally consistent across the globe. And it's a very concerning point, which we would come back to in our panel. I think with this context in the Indian case, it would be perfect to bring on Dr. Rajneesh Kumar to share a policy perspective on education technology and learning losses in a post-pandemic period. Dr. Kumar? You would need to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, how much time do I have, Dr. Aditi?
You could take about 10-15 minutes. That's fine.
Yeah,
We'll just run over.
I will be very, very quick, just about 5 minutes. Because
that's perfect. Okay.
I want to listen more than talk.
Okay, perfect.
So is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon to the panel and all the attendees. Well, under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, which actually translates to Self-Reliant India, the Prime Minister of India had announced a PM Vidya program just at the advent of the pandemic, because we all realized that this is perhaps for the first time such a thing has come to the country, and that time actually no one knew that it would continue for 2 years. It was expected that in the 3-4 months things could normalize, And there was absolutely no organized digital education program by that time. But we were happy that by the end of September, we had TV channels running. We had Diksha almost 70-75% content ready. This component had about five basic premises. We had an online portal called Diksha, which is digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing, one nation, one digital platform of school education for all the K-12 needs. One class, one channel, 12 channels of PMA Vidya, wherein in Hindi and English, and then some states in their own languages for content of class 1 to 12. Then we realized that internet, TV is still a problem. So we try to use the radio, computer radio, and podcasts for communication of, if not full education, at least some part of it. And then it was also realized that the differently abled children were having a serious issue. So at least for the visually impaired and hearing impaired, we attempted that there was Indian Sign Language. The content on the available on internet was friendly to the child with visual impairment. And then finally, we also try to use some mobile podcasts. And of course, the informal way of WhatsApp, Zoom, Google Class, all that continued. And we are happy and proud to say that there has been a learning loss to children. Agreed, nobody can deny that. But still, at least something had reached the children. The textbooks had reached almost all the children. The states had ensured that the teachers go and deliver the textbook to their households also. So they had access to textbooks, but of course, without teachers, it's very, very difficult to study. So Swayamprabha is our flagship program. It's 12 channels of PMA Vidya, and some of the content is also shown on Airtel, Jio TV, Tata Sky Dish TV. And this year, the budget has announced that there will be 200 more such channels. We are expecting that the TV reach may mitigate the loss of education, because there is still a lot of problem with the internet connectivity. Even if there's connectivity, there are problems with the devices. So at least in the main hubs of the villages or schools, we can have the TV channels transmitting some bit of information to the children, and it will be in a structured manner, almost like a virtual school for some time. But of course, now as things are improving, we hope that by 1st of April, things will normalize and schools will start running, because digital education can be supplementary. It can never replace a teacher. And at least in the primary education, without a teacher, it is going to be impossible for the child to get to that learning level. But digital education, yes, can enhance the methodology, can enhance even the capacity of the teacher, and can make things more interesting for the child. Then Diksha is also being used for a program known as the Nipun Bharat, which is basically foundation literacy and numeracy. And this was launched on the 5th of July, 2021. There's teacher professional development, there's student learning content. And the idea is that by 2023, 2024, all children up to the age of 8, 9 have some basic foundation, basic learning and numeracy capabilities, so that they don't drop out later. And it's been found by research, by all the organizations like ASAR and everyone, that if the child loses interest in reading and writing at that early age, it is almost impossible for the child to cope up in life, at least for the strictly academic profession. Of course, he could be skilled, but for the strict academic learning, it's a real impediment, and it can be very depressing for the child at that stage. So of course, radio, we have 230 radio stations. About 3,200 pieces of curriculum have been broadcasted through the 20 states and union territories. And it's called Dhwani Shala from NCERT. And there is also a podcast done by CBSE. Then community radio was also used. There's about 80 community radios have given lessons, which are basically based on the state curriculum, sometimes by the NCERT. But of course, this is not a replacement for any kind of education. It is just that at least something is delivered to the people who don't have access to the devices like TV or internet. Then there's radio in regional languages. Then the programs are scheduled, knowledge on air waves called Radio NCRT. The broadcast schedule is given to children. It's also transmitted to them. Then the iRadio of Diksha, what we've done is we tried that all these things that we have are, coherent. So whatever is shown on the Diksha is also on a YouTube channel of the NCRT, is also whatever is shown is given the radio is also on Diksha, so that if some child misses something, he can go to a center where there is internet. He can the Diksha is also an offline application. He can download the entire thing at that thing, come back home for a week, study on Diksha, and then go back the next week to some center where there is internet, because the Ministry of Department of Telecommunication has a big program known as BharatNet, in which they have already connected about 1.5 lakh villages, the Gram Panchayats, and they have the target of giving internet to all 2.5 lakh villages. And from those villages, cables could be laid to the schools, or they could be citizen hubs where citizens could access internet. And for the children with special needs, about 655 Indian Sign Language based contents have been issued. Then Mukta Vidya Vahini audio streaming podcast has podcast for the learners. Then talking books in Daisy format have been given for children with blindness and low vision. Guidelines for e-content have been developed. And last year in March and then again June, the ISL dictionary, Indian Sign Language Dictionary of 10,000 words, has also been uploaded on Diksha, so that there is enough material at least for such basic learning for the children with special needs. And of course, last year, based on the National Education Policy, we have issued the blueprint, which was inaugurated by the Prime Minister of India on 29th of July last year, which is called the National Digital Education Architecture, in which we want that the whole ecosystem should be energized to contribute to the digital education, because digital education is going to be the future, whether we like it or dislike it, whether we say it is going to replace a teacher, not replace it. These are all debates. But there is one thing is definite, that this is going to be the future, and personalized learning is the thing that we all have to really focus on, that how a teacher physically and the digital device can blend very so beautifully that the child has a complete ecosystem for learning. And sometimes what happens is that in a country where you have 95 lakh teachers, to have all teachers of the same standard is very tough. Some teachers in some schools are good, some teachers are simply not there in other schools. But if we have a common platform where everybody has equal access to good content, and then go on, have a blended mode of learning, that is the vision that we have. That's in NDR. Then NDR will also focus on things like the administrative aspects, the student tracking. Like this year, last 2 years had this migration problem. A student from Gujarat goes to Bihar, or Bihar goes to UP. Now, where does he get admission? How is his TC managed? So once we have a student tracking mechanism across the country, we may solve this issue. Also, a lot of children drop out of school. So how to track those children? What are they doing? Where are they going? So these issues can be sorted out with having this kind of architecture. So envisaged outcomes of the NDR is that the students will get access to on-demand learning materials, teachers get access to online support for lesson plans, the schools and school management get access to school management practices, the parents get access to child's holistic progress card, community plays a lot of role in voluntary engagement, and education administrators use data analytics to bridge the infrastructure gap, teacher availability gap, address dropouts, and make informed policy choices. This, to our mind, it could be a great game changer, because we have policies where you need to have a school in a particular location, how many schools to have in a village, how many teachers to have, can we club schools together, can we club their resources. All this can be handled very well if we have real-time data. And one interesting thing about Diksha is that there is a system of a QR code. Every single textbook printed by NCRT, at least at Delhi, and lot of states, has a QR code. And it's a permalink, which means that if the child scans the QR code through the Diksha app, he will get the latest content related to that book, that chapter. So about 5,800 books have been energized, about 60 crore textbooks have been printed across the country. And on Diksha, We have close to about 220,000 diverse contents, and about 18 crore students are using it, and 70 lakh teachers are have been using it on and off. And the consumption status tells us that about 3,400 crore page hits, which is close to 34 billion pages since the advent of pandemic, 33 plus languages on Diksha, and 5 lakh 340 crore learning minutes, and about 449 crore learning sessions have been done on Diksha. And this is when we don't have internet connectivity, which is very good. So imagine when we have almost 50% to say 75% internet connectivity, this would be phenomenal, this usage. So challenges, this is basically the thing that we can discuss, that how to enhance the digital experience of students. There's a chapter on national education policy on technology use and integration, chapter on online digital education. Internet connectivity is still a challenge in some areas, and this is being addressed with the BharatNet program. Digital literacy among citizens, because once you hand over a device to a citizen, a child or a parent, they are subject to a lot of abuse. Abuse could be self-invited also. Abuse could be, their ignorance. It could be anything. But the fact is that how to protect the child from the ill effect of cyberspace and cyber abuse is another challenge. Because it has been found in some research that handing over a device is actually not improving learning levels, as was also highlighted by Professor. But it is inevitable. We cannot stop it. It's just a matter of years. Every child is going to have a smartphone, whether we like it or dislike it. And even if we don't want to give a device, it will be the parents who will say that my child should have a device. So that's the end of my presentation. And if someone has any questions, of course, I'm free right now or later, as you say, Dr. Aditi. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajneesh. That was really quick, but also a comprehensive picture of the immense EdTech challenge the government of India has undertaken and the policies that they are implementing to meet that. I would request all the panelists to come up front now, because we would spend about, say, run short of time, so about 20 minutes in discussion together before we take on the several questions which have come in the Q&A box already. I would ask the attendees to keep putting their questions in, and then we can probably club them and take some of them as we go on. So I think the key themes that have come out today were, of course, of access, where Bjorn started talking about how do we reach out to the poorest 30% or so on, then, of course, was the idea that was brought up by Dr. Villima in terms of, we need to reach out to them, but we also need to understand that there have been massive learning losses. So how do we really catch up to that and then move forward? We then come to the third challenge of quality rather than quantity, and the difficult trade-off between the two, where while doing all of this, we need to manage, a good enhanced experience for the teachers, which is what Professor Creek was talking about, the distress teachers have gone through, the changes in their mindset, their psychology, and their way of working that have happened. And also what Dr. Kumar said in terms of, making sure that despite all of this quantity we are providing technologically or offline, we need to make sure that the students and teachers are truly going towards the goals of learning, right? So that's the next one. And then finally, a question which is continuously kept coming up is that what is the real future of teaching and learning across the globe with all these diversities, all of these issues existing together, right? Are we heading towards a blended model? What does that blended model look like in different settings in the UK, in India, in different states across India? So I would say that probably, given the time, we could start with the final question and then keep addressing the rest as we go. On what you think is the future of policy, practice, or research, whichever area you are working on, for education technology use within mainstream education and outside mainstream education. So within schools, but also just as e-learning and digital learning. So let me start with Professor Creek and then go on to each one of you.
Thank you very much. No challenge. No, it's an easy, big question to answer. I think I mean, I just as I alluded to in my talk, I think it's great that there's this huge renewed kind of prominence and recognition, certainly from kind of governments and ministers and policymakers acknowledging that this thing is important and is more than just about the technology. So you think about, there is a fundamental repositioning. I mean, certainly in Wales and the UK, there's an acknowledgement that this is about pedagogy and practice. This is about kind of cultures and behaviours in the classroom, and also it's moving away from that very traditional one-size-fits-all approaches. If there is a national plan, there is a national approach that will fit every school, every learner in every setting and context. I think clearly that doesn't work. And actually, there's no problems about having national approaches, but you need the flexibility within those approaches that's suitable for the context, for the learners, for the communities, for the socioeconomic challenges facing, and supporting different types of practitioners across the country. So that is a massive change. I think there still needs to be a further step around. There's a huge program of professional learning, kind of professional development for practitioners that we're seeing now, where there's an acknowledgement this stuff is a core part of the curriculum. So in Wales, digital competence is a statutory cross-curricular skill that has the same prominence as literacy and numeracy in the new curriculum. So that means everyone has to think about it. This isn't just the ICT or the tech teachers. This is everyone has to think about developing digital competence over the 3 to 16 age range for all learners. So that's a great thing. How do we do that now? So we have the policy, we have the legislation, we have the new curriculum. What does that mean in practice on a Friday afternoon in a small school, a small rural school in West Wales? So how do we make that happen? So I think that's the policy and kind of practice challenges, the implementation of some of this stuff to change the prominence and to build confidence and capability. The research challenges, I think, is around evaluation. So actually that criticality, as I mentioned, and also really effective evaluation of some of those interventions, and acknowledging they might not work, but having the flexibility to and the adaptability to refine.
Hold on to that, Tom,
Okay.
because you made some great points there, but I think the one size fits all approach and not taking that, but actually having a more localized approach is what I want to kind of come with to Wilima, because I want to know if that's what you think is the case in India as well, not just in Wales where Tom's done his research, but in India as well, any blended model needs to be contextualized. And how do you think that can really work from your experience?
So, first I'd like to say, I agree with Mr. Kumar and, and Tom, who talked about this, that this, we can't shy away from this. This is the future, right? The technology, you cannot say, oh, now we're going to go back to some business as normal. What is business as normal? There is a new, and so, but what we need to be smart about it. We also need to recognize that it's not the silver bullet, okay? Technology can be do we want it to be a divider, which we've seen during this time? There are huge equity issues based on access, or do we want it to be an enabler? Because it can be a very powerful enabler. And that's where the whole contextualization comes in. So, the thing is, we need to, it's actually quite amazing. And Tom talked about it and how the world pivoted. Right. I mean, we were in-person mode for education, whether it was school education or university or whatever. Yes, there were some online classes, but, but we pivoted and really fast. And so, yes, it may not have been perfect, but, but we need to learn from this. What worked, what didn't work, for who did what work, and this is the role of research and evaluation. And take it from there, because it's not a silver bullet, and certainly one size does not fit all. And it's not just Wales or the United States or India. I mean, we've got huge diversities, right? And not just across countries, but in classrooms themselves, right? In India, that is so. While it's easy, it's easy when you're scaling up, especially from the government's point of view, to have some standard model, and then you scale it up, and you go into command mode and say, oh, every school should be doing X, Y, or Z. But that's not the way, because one solution that works for a particular state will not work for the other. A solution that may work for older kids in higher grades is not, so how do you teach a child in grade 1 to read or do basic arithmetic? So I think, contextualize and be really smart, and the world pivoted really fast, but we need to learn from our experiences moving forward.
So let me come to Bjorn here on this point, because Bjorn, education sectors typically move like an elephant, slowly observing and then kind of bringing out changes. And now we want agility in our systems, right? And that too in a contextualized fashion. From your global experiences and also from the Hub's experience of working with stakeholders across, different types of countries, how do you think this is actually translating into practice, this contextualization across the world?
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, as Tom said. What does it mean in practice? How do you actually turn it into learning for children in our case, or learning in higher education? I think what's really interesting is to compare India and Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, of course, isn't a country, but when you look at the populations, actually India has a bigger population than the whole of Sub-Saharan Africa taken together. But India has a federal structure, right? And you could always argue what is the right granularity for different settings. And I think, with India, something like Diksha, how would you make that happen in Sub-Saharan Africa? That while there is some coordination through the AU, it's not that you have states that all the countries in Sub-Saharan Africa aren't states within a federal state that is Sub-Saharan Africa. So I think there are certain things that were possible in India because of certain conditions. I mean, the federal state is one, but also the fact that there are so many developers, software developers. So, software industry, people that can think and that can scale, that can adapt, tailor Diksha, can take those services, build new things onto them. That's very different in Sub-Saharan Africa. But I think there are a lot of things to be learned from that. We also do some work outside the EdTech Hub in the Caribbean. And again, very, very small states. How do you solve some of those issues for the small states? So I think it's one thing, I think, is preparing for the future. And that was also one of the questions that came up in the chat. What if this happened again? Like, the future is digital. I agree with that. But we're still in a transition period, especially for the poorest. And so, for example, could we come up with models of textbooks as open textbooks, as shareable resources that are available both digitally, which satisfies our aspirations for being digital and allows some people to access them, and have them available on print as well. In India, many of these things have been realized, but in many of the poorest countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, we're so far away from that still. So I think there's a lot of learning that can take place, and I think that would be my sort of call to, when I say research, I really mean dialogue around what works, what doesn't work, that has this whole spectrum, from the small insights that are poking into those gray areas and giving us small glimpses into those gray areas where interesting developments might lie, all the way up to, very rigorous at scale, mixed methods, including RCTs and QEDs and all of that. We need to really have dialogue around this. And I think we need to have that dialogue sooner than we are having it at the moment. Like, we need to be much more aggressive about not just waiting for publications to come out, in half a year's time, in a year's time, whenever the journal is ready, but really aggressively push. Why aren't we aggressively pushing preprints? In other disciplines, this is just so common already, like in high energy physics, because if you snooze, you lose, as you say in the UK, if you don't get your stuff out soon enough, somebody else will do it, So I think we can be much more aggressive about pushing information out there, sharing information, seeking collaboration that will give us some of these, transnational cooperations that we're seeing in India already. So all of the things to, open science, Tom was just messaging, open science, open data, open access, open educational resources, and open practices, open development, all of that. It's a bit stale because we've been talking about this for such a long time. But I really think this is important, the tried and tested things. The UK research councils mandated that everything that comes out of UK Research Council funding has to be open access. And people are up in arms about it, but at the end of the day, it's like, do you want the funding or do you not want the funding? It's like, take the funding and then you publish, and yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. And I want to quickly kind of move to Dr. Rajneesh and ask him this. You know, in the final slide or the second, I think the second last slide, you mentioned these massive numbers who have already taken part in this digital architecture with the government of India has created. So I think the conversation which has come up right now is more openness towards kind of collaboration, bringing in research, evidence collection to truly understand what works and what not. So how are you building this, if at all, in those systems, and probably working with researchers in the government, outside the government, or building that contextualized element in policy?
Well, their whole principle is this only, that the academicians, the university researchers, the edtech companies, and of course, hardcore academicians, they'll all, interact with the system. Once you have today we don't have data on how a child learns. It is one odd survey in 3 years that we have, or a yearly survey by some people, and that's also the sample size is very minuscule. Of course, for statistics purpose, it is okay, but for real time effect on the ground, you require a large database of how children learn. What are the gaps? So the national curriculum framework that is coming up is also going to address this issue, that whether we define a subject first and then define what is needed by the child, or we define what is needed by the child, the competencies required, and then define a subject. These are things which are important. In the past, it was not possible, but today with technology, everything is possible. I'll give you one small example. If my child is in class 11, and in India at least, I'm talking of India specifically, the child wants to study philosophy, physics, and economics. No school will offer that. Not because the school does not want to. The school does not have the infrastructure. It may not have a philosophy teacher. It may not have a schedule designed in such a manner that philosophy, physics, and mathematics can be taught together in the school. But if you have a blended learning approach, the child says, okay, I will study physics at school, study philosophy at home, and study sociology with some other teacher somewhere, and you please assess me and give me marks on that. This is possible on the platform that we are envisaging on NDR, which is this. And then you truly have a system where the child decides what he or she wants to study in life. You don't force a physics, chemistry, mathematics, computer science, or sociology, political science, economics only, or commerce stream only. This, to my mind, is going to be the biggest change in the education system, at least for the 9 to 12, because most children are not interested in education. They know it's important for their life, but they don't like the subjects. A very good example is history. Today, I'm a mechanical engineer. Now, I study history as if I'm going to give a test tomorrow. But when I was in class 9 and 12, I simply hated that subject. Why? Because we did not have a good way. Now you see Kings and Generals, one YouTube channel on history. It has animated every single war, animated every single major historical event. If you take that to the child or a smart TV and the teachers facilitating that learning, it is going to go a long way in enhancing learning outcomes. Children hate mathematics, whereas mathematics, to my mind, is the most beautiful subject a school can offer to a child. How abstractions are defining reality. How interesting. There's no number in universe. There's no number in nature, but it defines the entire universe. No, but children are not interested because we don't know. It's very difficult to get them interested in these abstract ideas. But blended learning can do it.
I think Rajneesh, you've really brought us back to one of the fundamental points where technology was being pitched for before the pandemic as well, which is kind of making learning fun, being a supplement to offline classes. But I think the added challenge today, where evidence becomes even more important, is really kind of understanding first the existing fundamental losses, then kind of meeting their contextual needs, and then finally providing this kind of quality through technology seamlessly, where they are not just learning better, but they are actually having a quality time, whether it's school or in their homes. So I think we have questions piling up. So what I would do is, to wrap this, I would ask each one of you to tell me two priority areas which need to be kind of taken care of in the next, say, 5 years to make this entire blended education, hybrid, online, digital, whatever you see the worldview as a reality in a practical and feasible way. So what do you think are the two spaces where technology can play a really, really important role in taking forward education goals? I would start with Tom again and then move on to each one of you.
Thank you very much. I'd probably say that it's not as if it's only just happened through the impact of COVID, but I think we've realized the massive impact of digital and data poverty. So what does this look like? So this isn't just an education issue. This is a sort of a social policy, a sort of societal kind of governmental issue. So and this isn't just an educational intervention. So actually we're talking about national infrastructure. We're talking about connectivity. We're talking about affordability and accessibility. I think that has been massively exposed and has reinforced and has widened the gaps. It's reinforced inequity and inequalities, certainly in the UK, and I would guess in many other jurisdictions. So I think how is that sitting top of government's agenda to address? Because it isn't just about giving kids laptops and dongles to kind of access the internet. That's the start of the intervention. That's not the end of the intervention. So I think, how is that being front and center in government's agendas? Because, we've seen this during COVID, that's one thing, but actually that's not gone away. So what does that look like as we start to emerge going forwards? And I think for me, the priority links back, kind of Bjorn kind of reaffirmed kind of the point around in the UK in particular, certainly in Wales, we've changed the curriculum, we've changed policy, the legislation has changed. There's guidance, there's a roadmap, delivery and implementation. So what does this look like? Actually, what will this look like in practice? So realizing the aspiration, there's 4 purposes to the new curriculum. We want digitally confident and capable young people. It's about future citizens. How do we do that? Professional development, investment in practitioners. How do we ensure we have confident and capable teachers and the teaching profession feel empowered and enabled and have the ability to do this effectively? So that's where I think, this is not a 2 or 3 year investment. This is a 10-year investment to really realize those benefits of the new curriculum and to think about what that looks like, to give young people the best start in their lives.
Fantastic. Bjorn?
Yeah, just to carry on from that, I think what we've heard from Tom is this focus on certain areas, like the future citizens, right? And then how do we make it happen? So, in terms of the UK government digital service, the strategy is delivery. The strategy has to be delivery. How do we make it happen in practice? And I think this focus, like when you look at Sierra Leone and the work that Minister David Senge is doing around like radical inclusion, like let's really focus on this. Let's really, really focus on inclusion. We must make this happen. And then people will follow those leads. So good leadership in that sector, focusing in thinking about the practicalities of it all. I do think that's really kind of central. The other area I think that hasn't received enough attention is the use of EdTech and disability. Like EdTech at the child level, if you'd said that pre-COVID, you say, yes, well, assistance for differently abled children. And I think we haven't given that enough attention. So there's a lot more there that can be done.
Fantastic. Velima? You have to unmute.
Like I said, we are not, it's there. Technology is there to stay. It's there to stay in education. So, the point that Tom made about affordable and scalable, right? So it has to be affordable. I mean, that's a precondition for it to be scalable. But when I say scalable, I also mean all inclusive, inclusive in that it should be accessible to all, not just to a few, which we already have that. It is accessible. The high cost, interventions are there. So that's one. And another thing, as since it's there to stay, and this is a point that Rajneesh made earlier, is digital literacy, and I mean a particular thing when I say that, for our kids and young people, because it's a very different time and it's a very different place. There's all of this social media. There is a lot of, there's always been peer pressure, but now the peer pressure that we talk about is a whole other ball game. How to deal with that? Because you can't say, oh, you take away the device. That's not an answer. It's there, right? And they are going to participate in all of that. And so how do we equip our young people to deal with all of this?
Absolutely. I think you also raised a very important point on the digital literacy part. So finally, Rajneesh, what are your final two takeaways in terms of priorities for the coming years?
Well, you see, I don't think we can deny many things. I have just one point to make. You see, there is a lot of role of chance and luck in a child's education. Which school he goes, does he get a good teacher? Good teacher gets transferred. What happens then? I also suffered from that. But digital education has the potential of removing that luck aspect from his life. If he gets a bad teacher, maths teacher, he has something that the government has to offer, which is the best in the country. So if he has the potential and the ability, the capacity to study maths, physics, chemistry, history, geography, despite having bad teachers, it is taken away. I'm not denying the teacher's role. I'm only saying it is just luck. This is one part. And the other part is, today we all know there's a loss of 2 years. Every child has not lost as much, but some children have lost more. Now, can the same teacher in the same manner teach the same 25 children, or we need to have some personalized plans? Digital education has that capability of giving that personalized plans. So the role of chance in one's life and the role of personalization in one's life, this can be bridged by digital education, and that is the great potential.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think we've had some great points made today. So what I would do is quickly move on to questions in the remaining time. Let me just unmute Professor Biju Paul Ibrahim. He's a professor in the public policy group in IIM Calcutta, and let him ask his own question.
Okay, thank you, Aditi. So I have put the question up, in the Q&A. So two questions. One to Professor Krit, and what I wanted to know was: are there universities, either in UK or outside, who are thinking of increasing batch sizes by adopting a blended mode? That is, having half the students, let us say, on campus and half at home, perhaps in different countries, so can increase internationalization as well, and then switching from term to term so that everybody has some time on campus and some time online. That could be one way by which you increase the number of international students. Is there some thinking about that? And the second question that I had was for Dr. Wadhwa, and that was, what are the kinds of changes that you have seen during the pandemic that you think are likely to endure? For example, this shift towards government schools. Are you likely to see that continuing because parents feel that government schools are much more reliable in the sense that they are likely to remain open even when things go wrong, or pandemic or other kinds of situations? So are you likely to see that continuing post-pandemic as well? Thank you. And thank you for all the other presentations. They were excellent. I really enjoyed them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tom, would you like to start, and then Vilima could continue?
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question. Thank you. I would say yes, in the sense of considering it. Do they have a model for it, or have they thought about how it works effectively in practice? Probably not. I would probably say, I think I can reflect on my own institution. We see this as a massive potential growth area for the kind of the resetting or the re-establishment of kind of international student market coming to the UK, and actually that balance between there's some students who want to attend physically, there's some who want to attend virtually and have a kind of essentially a distance learning program. Fusing those together, I'm not sure that anyone really yet has the environment, the teaching environments, the learning and teaching models and assessment models for that to work effectively in practice, I would say yet. I think that's probably a really interesting area of research to ensure that there's parity of learning experience from those kind of hybrid blended kind of cohorts as well. They could work really well in practice. It could be really, really interesting as long as there wasn't, you know, a sort of segregation or a separation of the people who are physically there compared to the people who are kind of attending virtually at a distance, and then whether there would be a parity of kind of learning experience. But I think it's really interesting. It could be hugely beneficial for having really interesting, diverse cohorts of learners, bringing people together. Actually, I was saying I've just been on an external validation panel for the University of Cyprus and the University of Tallinn, who are doing something in this space and trying to think about bringing people together for interaction and interaction design masters. And I think they have got a very solid established model for distance learning, kind of master's level study. But I think it's going to be interesting about how that works at scale across universities. I would finally say a lot of universities in the UK are looking to really boost their postgraduate talk provision, but actually what's the attractiveness, what's the USP, what's the unique selling point to say, you know, one institution over another. So, you know, there's lots of masters in computer science, you know, why would you go to a specific institution? What would be the experience of going there?
Great. I hope that answers the first question. Velima, would you like to take up the next one?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, that regarding government schools, like I said, you know, it's difficult to say. But, you know, I will say something that the numbers that I presented that, you know, for the 6 to 14 age group, a 5 percentage point increase is probably a little bit more than that. And the reason why I'm saying is that that came from the phone survey. So it, you know, leaves the bottom of the pyramid of people who did not even have a phone. And so, but, you know, again, like I said, one can understand why this was happening during this period. There were many reasons why that could have, you know, whether it was that the school shut down, budgets were squeezed, so parents couldn't afford the fees, influx of migrants in rural areas. So it's difficult to say whether it is a permanent change, but it is going to remain for a while, right? I mean, you know, the thing is that just because schools are opening doesn't mean that, you know, we are back to normal, right? It will take time for things to settle down. And you know, and like I said, the one thing that parents have seen, there is a general perception of parents that private schools are better than government schools. And when we're talking about rural areas, we are talking about, you know, the learning outcomes. Yes, they are slightly higher in private schools, but if you control for all the other characteristics that go into learning, the difference is not that much. But so that's why I said there is a perception. And what parents have seen during this period is that, you know, they got textbooks, the meal, you know, rations, the midday meal rations was a huge help, which was distributed, right, by government schools, even when schools were closed. So maybe some of this increase remains, but it's still too, I would actually wait for another year to get another round to see where this number stabilizes.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think this was interesting. Plus, I think, Velima, as you collect more and more data on this would get clearer, right? I think the advantage of doing these multiple rounds of data, coming back to evidence collection, is exactly that. I think the next question I would take on is a question by Shomita. It was on you know, the fact that a large part of the country actually doesn't have internet access in rural and tribal areas. So in those areas, how will Diksha really help? And I know that Bjorn has already put in some answer there. So Rajneesh, why don't you take it up first, and Bjorn, you can add post that as well, even verbally.
Yeah. Of course, Diksha will not reach there. That is the big challenge. That's why we want to go for the TV and the radio. But I think the pandemic is a very extraordinary condition. And our education system, you know, although we can talk of resilience to many things, does not depend on the pandemic as such. The government of India already had a plan in place that they will provide BharatNet internet to all villages by 2023-24. And every single village will have access. If it has a primary school or something, the internet will be given there. Private parties are also coming in. So there could be a Wi-Fi hub in the village. So internet access would be available to children. in the times to come. But till such time, yes, it is a challenge for the tribal areas, for people without devices. That's why we are trying, hoping that TV helps, radio helps. And the second point is how to get devices. So one is that you enable the school with a smart TV, with a smart board, with computers. The other is from class 9 to 12, we give them some tablet or some device, which if the semiconductor policy of India works well, then the cost of tablets could come down by 30-40%, which could be in the affordable range. Already we have smartphones about costing 5,000 rupees, which does almost everything required for at least educating a child. Now the challenge is whether mobile is good for the child or not. That doctors have varied opinions. Now that, of course, it's a debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajneeshji. Bjorn, you had a few interesting points to make on that as well. It'd be nice if you could share those. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I do think that when we say digital textbooks, people say, well, children don't have devices, so what's the point of that, But the reality is, if once you curate textbooks digitally, they can be printed. And so I think it's very important. I think the textbook won't survive. The textbook is kind of an artifact that will go away as we move digital. But an instructional sequence of content, curriculum that has scope and sequence, that will always stay. That's how children learn. So I tend to often use textbooks as a paradigm for having a scoped sequence of materials. And that scoped sequence for now needs to also be printable. It doesn't just have to be online and digital, it can also be printable. But if we never curate, if we never engage in the discourse of bringing these materials together, say into Diksha, so that other people can see them, we can think about the quality, we can think about the research, we can do it. Even if ultimately we print the book, having it together in Diksha is hugely important.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic point. It like kind of talks about, firstly, remove the information barrier or the knowledge barrier. And then, of course, the next is really in what way or in what format does the student use it, right? So great. I think the last point I would like to take on, a few comments on just the data that you all have collected. I think Tom has collected a lot of data internationally. EdTech Hub has data. Willima Pratham data is, or ASR data is there. So a few questions around, can students or early career researchers, or in fact, even full-time education researchers, get access to any of your data sets to really take on further studies, which is in a way stretch further from one of the recommendations we all had. Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of reaffirms the point Bjorn and I were making around kind of open research and open data. So yeah. I think the overwhelming majority of our data and even the survey designs are available on our institutional Figshare repositories, or you can certainly ask us for say like the Qualtrics survey, and we're happy to share that, so you can replicate the survey in different countries and jurisdictions. So for example, when I spoke about we did it in a number of countries, we didn't get a lot of responses in certain countries. So we're focused on, there's a South African paper, there's an Australian paper, there's an Irish paper, and obviously the UK context. So very happy for people to replicate surveys and compare and analyze our data sets as well. So yeah,
there you go.
Fully happy to support that.
Fantastic. And Lima, on the ASR data?
So the ASR data, our national surveys have always been in the public domain. Yeah. We have a query, all our reports are in the public domain, all our tools. So, the point that Tom is making, our questionnaire, our, the actual tool, ASR tool, is all in the public domain. You can use it. In fact, people use it. Most of the time, we don't even know when people are using our tools.
The so large is that also survey with raw data, Willima?
I was just coming to that,
okay.
Aditi.
Yeah.
The national surveys are all available. Some of the smaller surveys are not in the public domain, but the big field ASR surveys are all available. And there is a way and free of cost. So the students we have a query that they can write into and get the data.
Fantastic. I think just kind of wanted to bring that point out for the researcher who put in the question. Thank you so much. I think on that note, I feel like we're all here trying to take forward the openness in terms of sharing our experiences, the data we collect, the changes we have gone through personally, professionally in our work with respect to integrating technology and kind of putting forth our education goals. And in that, each of your inputs and your experiences have been extremely enriching. I would really like to thank all the panelists, starting from, of course, Dr. Rajneesh Kumar to Bjorn Hassler, Vilima Wadhwa, and Professor Tom Creek, for taking out valuable time and really sharing this with the cohort here at IMC and all the viewers. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Please continue doing the good work that you're doing in the education sector.
Yeah.
And looking forward to a lot more collaboration and free-spiritedness here. Okay, so more power and strength to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Aditi.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, first of all,
Thank you.
yeah, so just to say, yeah.
Yes,
so
yes, Manisha.
before we conclude, I just would like to say that it's really such a wonderful discussions, which provided us a lot of materials, for designing future policies. And what I can infer from whatever you discussed, that the importance of national policy, be it terms of the constraint, inclusiveness, and we all know we have to acknowledge the fact that we are moving towards the digital world. So, but given that inclusiveness is the most important part, and so Tom also said that, and it was also mentioned by Bjorn, that the national education policy should take the part, and that's really what Dr. Rajneesh has pointed out, that we are moving towards that directions. I do have one question to Vilima also, that do you have any ways to capture from your data, like from the dropped out children, whether they are involved as a child labor or not, where they are moving? You are not collecting that information, because we might be losing kind of, the skilled future labor force. And if this is really the learning loss, and that's what I was just interested. So that was just a query in my mind, but I'm really thankful to all the experts for giving us an opportunity to understand the nuisances of such online education and, the future direction of optimizing and extracting the opportunities which was thrown to us by the nature in the form of a virus. And we should feel actually proud for being human, because we know how to overcome challenges and create environment for the upliftment of the foundation of mankind, which is the education. That's the building block for us. So with that, I would like to thank also our director, Professor Uttam Sharkar, first, to make my life smooth in producing this webinar and arranged all the administrative red tape things with utmost importance, even within his busy schedule. And also, first of all, I would like to thank Aditi, without whom it would have not been possible for me to organize this webinar. She is the pillar of this house of webinar. I simply do not have the courage of thinking of organizing this conference without her help and guidance. And Shormishta, who is our secretary, who had to do all the background scores, even amidst her personal loss. And she kept her cool in this tough time. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to my publication committee members who always stood by my side, and both the deans. And actually, my academic dean, Professor Chakraborty, gave me the idea of considering this much talked about issues on education and its future challenges as a theme for the conference. And Professor Thakur, who is our another dean, gave me the necessary approval immediately. Sometimes even before my email comes to my sent folder. So, and I would like to thank our Professor Shaumakanti Chakraborty of our IIT, IT desk, who gave me the guidance to be efficient in digitizations. His support, along with his team in the computer center, made these things to happen. This webinar could only be arranged because of them only and because of the advice of Professor Chakraborty. And lastly, but not the least, the main producing team behind the script, the accounts department, and the team headed by Mr. Raman, who helped me to this, to this venture of selling in this unknown path for the first time. So with these, I would like to actually, close this curtain, and I'm very, very happy that we really had a very, very insightful discussions, and we hope to collaborate. We hope to continue our associations, and this is really a future agenda of the research for all of us who are in the education sector. And thank you, Tom. Thank you, Willima. Thank you, Bjorn, and thank you, Dr. Kumar, as well. And I don't want to say thanks to Aditi, because anyway.
I would just, I think I'll just take that one more extra second and say that on behalf of all of us here who are educationists in the education space and, have been dealing with these issues day in and day out for the past many years now, it's really a commendable effort on your part, Professor Manisha Chakraborty, an economist, who is an educator, but definitely not truly into education research, to put her interest in this topic, to support it as a part of the Decision Journal, to publish work by upcoming researchers on this topic, by experts and practitioners, to have this inclusive dialogue. And I think that takes a lot of courage, and it's truly valuable. So on behalf of the panel here, I would like to thank you for all your efforts. Thank you, everyone.
That's a sweet gesture, Aditi. That's a sweet gesture. Okay. So with that, we would like to finish, and namaskar to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.